So, Martin Scorsese's new film, Killers of the Flower Moon, has had its world premiere at the Cannes Film Festival on the 20th of May, scheduled for a wide release in October. Quite a few films have had their premiere at the Cannes. The new Indiana Jones movie, for example, which is getting roasted by critics. Never looked very good to begin with, to be honest. Even with James Mangold directing, they should have stopped with the third film. But all eyes were on Master of Cinema Scorsese and his adaptation of David Grann's non-fiction novel about the murders of the Native American Osage tribe in 1920s Oklahoma. Has the man still got it, or is he past his prime and over the hill? He certainly brought some heavy ammunition with him for the film. There's some big names attached to the picture. Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, Jesse Plemons, Brendan Fraser, and unlike many projects today which try and sell themselves as righteous causes for political points, the story in this film is actually one people can get behind for shining a light on an American saga not as well known as it should be. Currently, with 25 reviews, Flower Moon holds a 96% score on Rotten Tomatoes, and on Metacritic it has 91 out of 100 with 17 reviews. If it holds that score, although in all likelihood it is likely to go down when the film gets a wide release, it sounds like the film is a masterpiece. And that is a word that's being thrown around, masterpiece. Reviews are glowing all round, and in particular it seems Leonardo DiCaprio, Lily Gladstone and Robert De Niro's performances are getting rave reviews. DiCaprio and Gladstone I can understand. We've known the film will focus primarily on them, but De Niro being a highlight is a huge bonus. For those who have read the book, it's worth noting the film doesn't seem to be a direct adaptation. Scorsese has opted to ditch much of the birth of the FBI aspects and their investigation, instead zoning in on the Osage Nation and Ernest and Molly Burkott. There's an interview where Scorsese explained that Tom White, the FBI's lead investigator, isn't as interesting of a character because he was such a good man. He's a straight arrow who comes in and saves the day. Not a very Scorsese-ish character. Ernest is more conflicted though, and therefore more complex and interesting, and we don't know a lot about him historically, so it allowed Scorsese to embellish things for his movie. Apparently the film got a 9-minute standing ovation at Cannes, but that doesn't really mean anything. They seem to clap and boo at random. And clapping for 9 minutes on end seems like a really weird thing to do. And I have to say, and I say this about any movie, it never helps to raise your expectations for a film to the stratosphere. And I would exercise caution and advise people to temper their expectations. I like to think of myself as level-headed, and I don't think it helps audiences if they get carried away before they've even seen a film. I mean, after all, Scorsese and co. are cinema royalty. The story is about a marginalized, terrorized group of people whose voice is finally being heard. It's highly unlikely that critics were going to collectively trash Killers of the Flower Moon, especially at Cannes, which has something of a reputation as an artsy-fartsy place. There's an interesting Reddit review thread which takes out segments from major reviews. The Hollywood Reporter said, audiences unfamiliar with Grann's book or with the actual history which draws a parallel early on with the Tulsa race massacre might be at a slight advantage here, given that each nasty turn this ugly chapter from America's past takes makes its depravity more astonishing. Scorsese has made an unpassioned film that honours both the victims and the survivors. IndieWire gave it a B+, saying, it's a difficult balancing act for a filmmaker as gifted and operatic as Scorsese, whose ability to tell any story rubs up against his ultimate admission that this might not be his story to tell. And so, for better or worse, Scorsese turns Killers of the Flower Moon into a kind of story that he can still tell better than anyone else. A story about greed, corruption, and the mottled soul of a country that was born from the belief that it belonged to anyone callous enough to take it. That sounds a bit weird, to be honest. Why would this not be Scorsese's story to tell? He's a top-tier filmmaker who's made movies about Jesuit priests, a widow and a preteen son with Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, an unstable boxer with Raging Bull, and all sorts. Does he have to be an Osage himself to have the right to make the film? It reminds me of when Spike Lee said that only a black man could direct a Muhammad Ali biopic when the project was helmed by Michael Mann. But why though? You could use that same argument and say only a former boxer should direct an Ali biopic, only a Muslim, etc, etc. Variety said, instead of focusing his cameras on the native victims, The Irishman director lets Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro have the lion's share of the screen time in this meaty but demanding true crime saga. This kind of runs contrary to what a lot of reviews say about there being immense focus on the Osage Nation. But it's good news for me as a De Niro fan because previous reports suggested he wasn't in the film much, but it turns out that isn't actually the case. The Wrap said, "In that regard, his Killers of the Flower Moon is vast and vital in its scale, purpose and emotional scope. A western thriller and ensemble piece that is every bit a Scorsese crime picture as one can dare to imagine." The Guardian, who gave it 5 out of 5 and called it an instant American classic, said, "Scorsese presents a remarkable story with an audacious framing device of a briskly insensitive true crime radio show featuring Osage characters crassly played by white actors. This is an utterly absorbing film, a story that Scorsese sees as a secret history of American power, a hidden violence epidemic polluting the water table of humanity." The Atlantic said, "As such, Killers of the Flower Moon is of a piece with not only The Irishman but also Scorsese's other recent film, Silence. These works have a much more melancholy energy than his baroque, frenzied prior efforts, The Wolf of Wall Street, Shutter Island, and The Departed. The 80-year-old director is undeniably in the twilight of his career. I want to tell stories and there's no more time," he told Deadline. Fittingly, Killers of the Flower Moon is paced deliberately, almost like an elegy. It's also one of the most rewarding projects of his long career, a sign that Scorsese has no intention of fading away, even as the film landscape transforms around him yet again. This is important to note, I think. Don't be fooled by the film's trailer where you may have walked away thinking the film is a high-octane thriller. Critics are pretty unanimous in saying the film is very slow, so be prepared for a melancholy and lengthy 3.5 hours. Deadline said, "Killers of the Flower Moon takes us through a very dark part of our history, and incredibly at the same time of the horrendous Tulsa massacre of 1921, just 30 minutes down the road. And if it does nothing else, reminds of just how horrible we can be to each other, a reminder needed now more than ever. That alone makes Killers of the Flower Moon a movie that could not come at a better time." Vulture, whose review contains major spoilers so I'd avoid it if I was you, said, "For all its extravagant running time, 3 hours and 26 minutes, its big swing history lessons and its tale of an Old West giving way to the regimentation of a modern police force, Killers of the Flower Moon turns out to be that simplest and slipperiest of things, the story of a marriage, and a twisted, tragic one at that. I know Killers isn't focusing on the FBI a lot, but that part about the Old West giving way to a modern police force sounds cool. That was one of the most interesting parts of the book, the theme of change, symbolized best perhaps by the new FBI with their new methods, a far cry from the old cops who were, well, literally cowboys, and people attempting to cling to old ways. One such way was the big cowboy hat that Tom White, played by Jesse Plemons, wears. Vanity Fair said, "Scorsese's film is nonetheless effectively rattling, a grueling delineation of events that gracefully eschews the melodrama and sensationalism of so much true crime. Gladstone ably holds the soul of the film, while DiCaprio and De Niro provide damning illustrations of good old boy affability masking so much prejudice and avarice. Jesse Plemons is also a comfortably competent presence as an investigator from the newly formed FBI. Those heading to a Martin Scorsese movie looking for the electric veer of so many of his past films may initially be disappointed, but as Killers of the Flower Moon seeps in, it shocks, resounds, and haunts. Those heading to a Martin Scorsese movie looking for the electric veer of so many of his past films may initially be disappointed. That should be on the poster. I said similar things when I watched The Irishman during its limited run before it came out on Netflix, telling people not to expect Goodfellas and Casino. Scorsese said it, Thelma Schoonmaker said it, then it came out and so many people were disappointed it wasn't Goodfellas. Above all, it's a Martin Scorsese picture, brimming with reverence for a culture that survived a horrible trauma, as it is filled with exhilarating flourishes, film history references, and explorations of the fault line between the sacred and the profane. And yes, it's a masterpiece. That's from the Rolling Stones. Total Film gave it 5 out of 5 and said, weaving the Tulsa race riots, the KKK, and the Mansons into its tapestry, Scorsese's opus questions the misdeeds of America in the last century while linking them to the pressing issues of today. Addressing racial violence, nationalism, the continued epidemic of missing and murdered indigenous women, and even our lurid obsession with true crime, Killers of the Flower Moon paints a robust picture of a moment in history that invites viewer introspection. As Ernest asks pretentiously when reading from a book on Osage history, can you see the walls in this picture? Well, can you? And the Los Angeles Times, one of the few reviews which was quite lukewarm, said, in the background of all the dense, teeming action, you may hear reverberant echoes of Goodfellas and The Irishman, Gangs of New York and The Wolf of Wall Street, among other indelible American epics of organized crime and tribalist violence. But you will also hear, in the agonized cries and silences of an Osage woman named Molly Burkhart, a superb Lily Gladstone, Ernest's wife, a story of this nation's original sin, here compounded to a degree of monstrosity and horror that can give even a chronicler of human evil as seasoned as Scorsese pause. Other reviews include The Independent calling the film a masterpiece, and Vogue saying it will surely be an awards season juggernaut. Being the pessimist that I am, I was looking for some negative reviews and found one or two. The BBC gave it 3 stars and said it was too slow, and their review is a bit strange because it said at one point, if Scorsese was set on making a blackly comic romp featuring a patronizing gangster and his numbskulled nephew, maybe he shouldn't have used the real massacre of Native Americans as its subject. Yeah, but the stuff this reviewer is criticizing actually happened. These were real people. And there's also the Sunday Times who call the film a damp squib, but I can't read their review because it's behind a paywall. So there you have it. It looks like the film is excellent. Much of the praise involves the performances, the harrowing feeling the film gives you, and the historical significance. Negatives seem to be that the film is slow and long, which, I don't mean to sound patronizing, but what exactly did you expect? So are you looking forward to Killers? What do you make of the reviews? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.